I'm Amanda Larson, a first-year Master's in Social Innovation student at the Kroc School of Peace Studies at the University of San Diego. I'm here interviewing Dean Peacock, a visiting scholar at the Kroc School and director of the Confronting Militarized Masculinities initiative at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Dean is also the co-founder of the South African NGO Sanka Gender Justice and an honorary senior lecturer at the University of Cape Town. Welcome, Dean.
Thank you, Amanda. It's a great privilege to be here and really looking forward to the conversation. I have really enjoyed my experience so far as a visiting scholar at the Kroc School, and I'm looking forward to the next few months of working together.
Wonderful. We are so thrilled to hear your answers. Our first question, so you're the director of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom's initiative to confront militarized masculinities, support women's rights, and advance feminist peace. What do you mean by militarized masculinities and feminist peace?
Yeah, great question. So militarized masculinities, I think if we think about some of the political leadership in the world at the moment, we think here in the US of Donald Trump, we think of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, our former president in South Africa, Jacob Zuma, and the model of manhood that they attempt to convey. We can think of those as examples in many ways of militarized masculinities, men who equate compromise, negotiation, power sharing with weakness, and men who absolutely valorize the use of force, who equate being a man with being tough, aggressive, quick to threaten, and who are invested in having power and control over others. Men for whom aggression is a sign of strength and really defines who they are as men. So that's what we think about as militarized masculinities. Of course, it's not just about individual men, though. It's about the war economy. It's about the systems and institutions that deliberately exploit these ideas of manhood. And so if you think of the gun industry, for instance, and the ads that they use, they produce a particular idea of being men, which they use to make money, but that also, of course, contribute to conflict. And as we've seen in the US, to mass shootings, to domestic violence, and to elevated levels of suicide. So it's individual notions of what it means to be a man that equate being a man with domination, control, aggression. And I think it's important to recognize those don't just come from nowhere. They're not ahistorical. They are contextually produced by religious institutions, industry, political parties, etc. And so what we see in situations where there is militarism and where there are these militarized ideas of being men is that social priorities then become skewed towards violence and conflict and war. We see that very clearly here in the US, a country that spends way more money on the army, on prisons and police than any other country in the world, and that has in fact increased its budget for nuclear weapons, for conventional weapons, for the military generally, while it has simultaneously decreased funding for health and education, social services, Medicare, Medicaid. And COVID has really brought this into stark relief. It's kind of made clear what the consequences are when we allow these patriarchal notions to dominate in society. And feminist peace, to answer the second part of your question, is in many ways just the opposite of that. It's a peace that recognizes and affirms the needs and rights of women, and in which women play a central role in kind of negotiating the terms of the new social contract. And WILPF, as you mentioned, has been working for feminist peace since 1915 in response to a quite unnecessary war, the First World War, that men's egos were centrally implicated in starting. And so WILPF has been doing work to advance women's rights and to advance feminist peace for 105 years.
Wonderful. Thank you for those terms. They're so descriptive. And even with feminism, I think of the connotations that can have at different times, and associating peace with that while, reducing violence with masculinity is so important. So thank you for that. And For a second question, WILPF is the oldest women's peacemaking organization in the world, established in 1915 during the First World War. How did it come to be that WILPF is taking on this work with men?
Yeah, so WILPF has obviously always had a central focus on these militarized ideas of manhood and on men. So in as much as WILPF has pushed for feminist peace, they have had to push back against patriarchal notions of gender. So WILPF has always been clear about men's control over many of the key institutions that drive the war economy. The arms trade as one example of that. If we think about the CEOs of the large arms companies, vast majority men, historically and currently. So WILPF has always been really clear as it's done its work to challenge the war economy, to push back against these notions of gender that valorize conflict, that they've got to engage men. And what's been perhaps a little bit different over the last decade is that WILPF has begun to work more directly with men in local communities, men in positions of power, attempting to get them to be a part of the solution. So if I give you a concrete example, in Afghanistan, where WILPF has 10,000 volunteers, 3,000 of those are men. And those men have been doing incredible work with imams, with muftis, with a range of different Islamic leaders to get those religious leaders to talk differently about gender and women's roles in Afghanistan. That has facilitated a process now where there are more women than there've ever been in the current peace negotiations happening. And so it's using men's influence and men's power to advance women's rights. And so that's part of the logic and rationale.
That's wonderful and inspirational that it can happen on such an individual level and with a group. So it sounds like WILPF's doing really incredible work. Our last question, I know it's a challenging time for all of us. We would love to know, is there any self-care practice or reading that is helping you make sense of the world, or militarized masculinities, or the men's potential for peace?
Yeah, it's a really important question that you ask. So I think for those of us who do work on the issues of violence and domestic violence, sexual violence, self-care is critically important. And if we intend to do this work over the long haul, it's really important to find practices that kind of affirm us and help us recover from the sometimes vicarious traumatization of the work. So for myself, I've always been a very kind of active athlete, running and swimming and cycling. I do a lot of that. During these COVID times when we were all in lockdown, I've been the beneficiary of fantastic baking that my daughter Amber does every day, or not every day, but many days. And so we stop work at 4 o'clock and eat cake and muffins and cookies. And that's been a wonderful way to connect. And something I feel very fortunate for. My work usually has me on the road a lot, and it's great to be able to spend time with family. In terms of reading, there are a number of authors I return to frequently. One of those is Rebecca Solnit, herself an anti-war and anti-nuclear weapons activist, and she's written lots of amazing books. The one that I'm reading at the moment is titled A Paradise Built in Hell. And it tells the story of the ways in which local communities often find meaning and cohesiveness in the middle of emergencies. So she describes the incredible response to the earthquake in San Francisco in 1906. She describes the ways in which communities have responded collectively to natural disasters, which of course is very timely given what's happening in California with climate change and the fires that you've been dealing with. So Rebecca Solnit, her book, Hope in the Dark, is always absolutely inspirational. And then I've been reading a lot about kind of feminist work to address prisons and mass incarceration and look at non-carceral approaches to dealing with gender-based violence. And so I've been reading Beth Ritchie, I've been reading Emma Thuma, Lee Goodmark, who are all, I think, really on the cutting edge of saying, we have to think about how we prevent the violence before it starts, because our current reliance on criminal legal sanctions is in fact harming many of the women we had wanted to assist to leave abusive relationships. And then lastly, I'm reading an amazing book by Mike Mesner, who's a sociologist at USC, who's written about men and masculinities for many, many years. And his latest book looks at vets from the US military who have become peace activists. And they describe their trajectories, and in some ways, their efforts to make amends for their involvement in wars that were either illegal or unnecessary and extremely harmful, as was the case in Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, and the list is long. So I'm finding inspiration in those stories.
Wow, each of those sound fascinating. And what I'm hearing is we have to go running while eating cake and then just have this small collection of incredible books that you recommended.
Well, and given all the cake I'm eating, the running is essential. So
yeah, I believe it. Well, thank you so much, Dean, for taking the time to speak with us and share your wisdom with the USD community. We so appreciate it, and we're looking forward to future collaborations for sure.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and I hope that COVID allows a visit to the campus and to do some work with students and faculty there. But really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll welcome you anytime, Dean. Thanks so much.